Graceland, the iconic Memphis estate of Elvis Presley, is not just a symbol of rock and roll history, but also a site of whispered mysteries and unexplained phenomena. For decades, rumors have circulated about ghostly encounters within the mansion's walls, and visitors often report strange occurrences. Many fans believe that Elvis never truly left Graceland. Security guards have reported hearing faint melodies of his piano late at night, despite the music room being empty. Others claim to have seen a shadowy figure in one of his favorite rooms, the Jungle Room, where he spent countless hours. A particularly chilling story comes from a former housekeeper, who swore she heard footsteps in the upstairs hallway. When she investigated, she found the door to Elvis's bedroom slightly ajar, a space that remains off-limits to the public to this day. Elvis isn't the only spirit said to linger. Witnesses have described the apparition of a woman in 1950s attire, believed to be his mother, Gladys Presley, who died in 1958. Her presence is often accompanied by the smell of her favorite perfume. Tour guides have also mentioned cold spots and disembodied voices in the meditation garden, where Elvis and several of his family members are buried. Some visitors have even captured strange anomalies in photographs taken near the gravesite. In 2002, a paranormal investigation team was allowed limited access to Graceland after hours. Using specialized equipment, they picked up faint voices and unexplained electromagnetic activity, particularly around the piano and upstairs quarters. While skeptics dismissed the findings, the team insisted they had experienced something extraordinary. Countless fans visiting Graceland have shared their own eerie encounters. One woman reported seeing a man in a white jumpsuit walking past the gates late at night, only to vanish into thin air. Another visitor claimed to hear Elvis's unmistakable voice humming as she stood outside the meditation garden. Graceland remains a place of reverence for Elvis's fans, but for those attuned to the paranormal, it's also a hotspot for ghostly activity. The lingering presence of the king, his family, and perhaps even unknown spirits make this mansion a chilling yet awe-inspiring destination. Could it be that Elvis's love for Graceland is so strong that even in death, he refuses to leave? Or is it the collective energy of millions of visitors keeping his spirit alive? Whatever the answer, one thing is certain: Graceland holds more than just memories. It holds mysteries waiting to be uncovered. It was a quiet night in Memphis when Sarah and her husband, Tom, decided to take the evening tour of Graceland. As avid fans of Elvis, they had planned their visit for years. The group was small, the atmosphere serene, almost too serene, as though the house itself was holding its breath. The tour guide, a soft-spoken man in his 50s, spoke passionately about Elvis's life, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It started in the trophy room, where artifacts from the king's career were displayed. As the guide recounted a story about one of Elvis's performances, Sarah swore she saw movement reflected in the glass of a display case. A shadow passed quickly behind her, but when she turned, there was no one there. She nudged Tom, but he waved it off. "You're letting your imagination run wild," he whispered, smiling. As the group entered the jungle room, the temperature dropped noticeably. The tour guide explained the room's unique decor, but Sarah's attention was drawn to the large green chair in the corner. For a split second, she thought she saw someone sitting there, a man, his face obscured by shadows. She blinked, and the chair was empty again. "Did you see that?" she asked Tom. "See what?" Before she could answer, the guide's voice faltered. His eyes flicked toward the same chair, and he hesitated for a moment before continuing the tour. The final stop on the tour was the main staircase, leading to the private quarters upstairs, a space forbidden to the public. The guide explained that out of respect for Elvis, no one was allowed beyond the landing. But as the group listened, Sarah's gaze was fixed on the top of the stairs. She felt a chill run down her spine when she noticed a faint light flicker under the door to Elvis's bedroom. "Do you see that?" she whispered to Tom. This time, Tom looked uneasy. "It's probably just the staff," he replied, but his voice lacked conviction. As the group moved on, Sarah lingered near the staircase, unable to resist the pull of curiosity. Suddenly, the faint sound of humming reached her ears. It was distant but unmistakable, a deep, familiar voice singing a tune she couldn't quite place. "Sarah!" Tom's voice snapped her back to reality. The group had already moved on, and she hurried to catch up, but the feeling of being watched stayed with her. After the tour ended, Sarah and Tom decided to take one last walk around the property. The air was cool, and the moon cast eerie shadows across the lawn. As they approached the meditation garden, where Elvis and his family were buried, Sarah noticed a figure standing near the gravesite. It was a man in a white jumpsuit, his back turned to them. His presence felt solid, too real to be a trick of the light. "Excuse me," Tom called out, thinking it was a fellow tourist. The figure didn't move. As they approached, the man turned slightly, and for a brief moment, Sarah thought she saw Elvis's face. Her breath caught in her throat, but before she could say anything, the figure vanished into thin air. Shaken, Sarah and Tom returned to their hotel, but Sarah couldn't sleep. The events of the evening played over and over in her mind. She decided to call the Graceland Visitor Center to report what they'd seen, hoping for an explanation. The phone rang twice before a woman answered. "Graceland, how can I help you?" Sarah recounted the night's events, expecting laughter or disbelief, but the woman's response was unsettling. "You're not the first to see him," she said quietly. "The king has a way of letting his presence be known." Before Sarah could respond, the line went dead. The room felt colder after the call. Sarah stared at her phone, the woman's cryptic words echoing in her ears. "The king has a way of letting his presence be known." "Who was that?" Tom asked, sitting up in bed. "I don't know," Sarah whispered, clutching the phone as if it might ring again. "But she didn't seem surprised by what we saw." Tom sighed and rubbed his temples. "We're probably just tired. Let's get some sleep and figure it out in the morning." Reluctantly, Sarah agreed, but as she turned off the bedside lamp, a flicker of light outside their window caught her attention. She parted the curtains, expecting to see the glow of streetlights or passing cars. Instead, she saw a dim figure standing in the parking lot, illuminated by the pale moonlight. It was the same man, the one in the white jumpsuit. He was staring directly at their room. The next morning, Sarah woke to find a note slipped under their hotel door. She picked it up, her hands trembling. The paper was yellowed and smelled faintly of tobacco. In neat handwriting, it read, "Return tonight. The truth awaits." Sarah showed the note to Tom, who immediately grew defensive. "This has to be some kind of prank," he said. "We're not going back there." But deep down, Sarah felt an unshakable pull. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was something stronger, something she couldn't explain. "We have to go," she insisted. "If we don't, we'll always wonder." Tom hesitated but finally relented. "Fine. But if things get weird again, we're leaving." "Agreed." Sarah nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure she could keep that promise. As night fell, the couple found themselves once again at the gates of Graceland. The estate was eerily quiet, far different from the bustling tours of the day. They had expected to find the note's author waiting for them, but the grounds were empty. "Maybe we've been set up," Tom muttered, glancing around nervously. But Sarah's attention was drawn to the faint glow in the upper windows of the mansion. The same flickering light she had seen the night before. Without waiting for Tom, she pushed the gate open. It wasn't locked and began walking toward the house. "Sarah, wait," Tom hissed, but she didn't stop. The front door creaked as it opened, revealing the dimly lit interior. The air smelled faintly of wood polish and something else, something sweet and decayed. They stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind them. "Hello," Sarah called out, her voice trembling. No answer. The house felt alive, its silence punctuated by creaks and groans, as though the walls themselves were breathing. The couple moved cautiously through the halls, their footsteps echoing in the vast space. Then, from the direction of the jungle room, they heard it. The unmistakable sound of a piano playing soft, mournful, and deliberate. "That's impossible," Tom whispered. "There's no one here." But as they approached the room, the music grew louder. The melody was hauntingly familiar, yet neither of them could place it. When they stepped into the jungle room, the piano stopped abruptly. The green chair in the corner was no longer empty. A man sat there, his face obscured by the shadows, his figure unmistakable. He leaned forward slowly, his voice low and gravelly. "You shouldn't have come back. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story." The man in the chair leaned forward, just enough for the faint light to catch the edge of his profile, a strong jaw, dark eyes that seemed to pierce through the dimness. His presence was palpable, the air in the room growing heavy with an unexplainable tension. Sarah froze, her breath caught in her chest. Tom's hand gripped her arm tightly, his knuckles white. "Who are you?" Tom managed to stammer, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, he tilted his head, as if listening to something neither of them could hear. The room seemed to pulse with energy, a faint hum vibrating through the floor. "You've crossed a line," the man said finally, his voice low and steady. "Some doors, once opened, can't be closed." Before either of them could respond, a sharp creak echoed from above. Both Sarah and Tom instinctively looked up toward the forbidden upstairs quarters. I think we should leave," Tom said, his voice quivering. But Sarah couldn't move. Something about the man's presence felt both threatening and familiar. She struggled to form words, her thoughts racing. "Are you?" she began, but the figure in the chair raised a hand, silencing her. "You need to go," he said, more forcefully this time. His gaze flicked toward the staircase. "Before it notices you." The words sent a chill down Sarah's spine. "What notices us?" Tom demanded, his voice rising in panic. The man didn't answer. Instead, he stood abruptly, and in an instant he was gone. The chair was empty, as though he had never been there. A low, guttural hum began to resonate through the house, vibrating in their chests. The sound grew louder, more discordant, like an old record player spinning out of control. Then they saw it, a dark shadow spilling slowly down the staircase, its shape shifting and writhing like smoke. It moved with purpose, as though it were alive, and its presence filled the room with an oppressive dread. "Run," Sarah whispered, but her legs wouldn't obey. Tom grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door, but it refused to budge. It was as if the house itself had locked them in. The shadow stopped at the base of the stairs, coalescing into a vaguely human form. Its face was a void, a deep blackness that seemed to absorb the light around it. A voice, raspy and layered with tones, filled the room. "You were warned." In a desperate attempt to break the mounting terror, Sarah reached for her phone and snapped a picture of the figure. The flash briefly illuminated the room, but when she looked at the screen, her blood ran cold. The photo didn't show the shadowy figure at the bottom of the stairs. Instead, it revealed a clear image of a man in a white jumpsuit standing at the top, looking down at them with piercing, sorrowful eyes. "Elvis," she whispered, her voice trembling. Before Tom could respond, the shadow surged toward them, and the room plunged into total darkness. The room was swallowed by an oppressive blackness, so thick it felt like a physical force pressing against their skin. Sarah clung to Tom, her heart pounding in her ears. The silence was deafening, broken only by their ragged breathing. Then came the whisper, low and fragmented. It drifted through the darkness like a forgotten melody. "You should have stayed away." "Who's there?" Sarah called out, her voice shaking. The reply wasn't words but a sound, a faint, haunting laugh that echoed from all directions. It wasn't the voice of the man in the chair, nor was it the guttural rasp of the shadow. This voice was something else entirely, something ancient and unrecognizable. Suddenly, a dim light flickered to life, casting faint, shifting shadows across the room. It wasn't coming from the overhead fixtures but from the piano. The keys moved on their own, striking an eerie, disjointed melody. Tom pulled Sarah toward the door again, but it still wouldn't budge. "We have to get out of here," he hissed, his voice cracking. Sarah's eyes were drawn to the piano. The light around it seemed to ripple, distorting the air like heat waves. As the melody continued, she noticed something strange, a figure forming in the light, faint and ghostly. "Elvis?" she whispered again, but the figure didn't respond. It simply stood there, its outline flickering like an old film reel, staring directly at her. Then the whispering returned, louder this time, overlapping voices weaving together in an incomprehensible chorus. Tom was frantically tugging at the door when Sarah spotted something she hadn't noticed before. Behind the piano, the wallpaper seemed off, as if it was hiding something. "Tom," she said, grabbing his arm. "Over there." "What are you talking about?" he snapped, but when he followed her gaze, his eyes widened. The light from the piano intensified, illuminating the edges of what appeared to be a hidden door. Without thinking, Sarah ran toward it, pulling at the edges of the wallpaper. The paper peeled away easily, revealing an old wooden door with a tarnished brass handle. "Help me," she urged, and Tom rushed to her side. Together, they forced the door open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "Absolutely not," Tom said, shaking his head. "We don't have a choice," Sarah replied, glancing back at the room. The shadowy figure was no longer at the base of the stairs, it was moving toward them. The couple hurried down the stairs, the air growing colder with each step. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving them in near-total darkness. Tom fumbled for his phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam illuminated a small, dusty basement filled with relics, old records, faded photographs, and stacks of yellowed letters. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something metallic, like blood. On the far wall, a large mirror caught Sarah's attention. It was cracked and fogged, but something about it drew her in. She stepped closer, ignoring Tom's protests. As she approached, the reflection shifted. It no longer showed the room but a different scene entirely, a young Elvis Presley sitting at a piano, his face etched with sorrow. He seemed to be looking directly at her, mouthing words she couldn't hear. "Sarah, don't," Tom warned, but it was too late. She reached out, her fingers brushing the cold surface of the mirror. The room around them seemed to lurch, the walls groaning as if they were alive. From behind her, the whispering voices returned, now louder and more urgent. "Turn back, turn back, turn back." As Sarah's fingers grazed the cracked glass, the reflection rippled like water. The image of Elvis at the piano dissolved, replaced by something far more unsettling, a vast, shadowy expanse, stretching endlessly, where indistinct shapes moved in the distance. The whispering voices grew louder, almost pleading now. "Turn back. You're not supposed to see this. Sarah, step away," Tom shouted, his flashlight beam darting around the room as though expecting something to emerge from the darkness. But Sarah was transfixed. From within the mirror, a figure began to form, a silhouette, tall and imposing, with glowing eyes that seemed to burn into her very soul. It raised a hand, its long fingers pressing against the inside of the glass, as if trying to break through. The mirror shuddered violently, a spiderweb of new cracks spreading across its surface. "Do you hear it?" Sarah murmured, her voice distant and dreamlike. "Hear what?" Tom demanded, his panic rising. "The music, it's coming from inside." Tom grabbed her arm, pulling her back, and she stumbled, breaking her trance. At that moment, the mirror's surface went black, its faint glow extinguished. Behind them, the piano upstairs struck a single, chilling note that reverberated through the house. Then silence. In the corner of the basement, something rustled. Tom swung his flashlight toward the sound, revealing an old, dust-covered piano bench. Sitting atop it was a piece of yellowed sheet music, the ink faded but still legible. Sarah picked it up, her hands trembling. The title read, "The Final Performance." Beneath it, scrawled hastily in red ink, were the words, "Play it and they'll come. Stop and you'll stay." "What does that even mean?" Tom asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah shook her head. "I don't know, but I think it's a warning." As if in response to her words, a low hum filled the room. The walls seemed to vibrate, and faintly, from somewhere deep within the house, they heard the familiar, unmistakable voice of Elvis Presley, singing a haunting rendition of Unchained melody. It wasn't a recording. It was live. Tom backed away, dragging Sarah with him. "This isn't real. This can't be real." But Sarah wasn't listening. She was staring at the piano in the corner of the room, its keys gleaming as though they'd just been polished. A cold wind seemed to emanate from it, carrying with it the faint smell of cigar smoke and gardenias. "It wants me to play," she said softly. "No," Tom snapped, stepping between her and the piano. "We're leaving. Now." But the door at the top of the stairs slammed shut with a deafening bang, and the shadowy figure from the mirror appeared on the steps, descending slowly, deliberately. The whispering voices rose to a crescendo, "Play the song, or it takes you both." The shadowy figure loomed at the bottom of the staircase, its form shifting and pulsating like smoke trapped in a jar. Its featureless face turned toward Sarah, and though it had no eyes, she could feel its gaze boring into her. "Play the song or stay forever," the whispers repeated. But now the voice of Elvis seemed to mingle with them, mournful and heavy with regret. Sarah clutched the sheet music, her mind racing. Was this some kind of cruel trick? Or was there a chance, no matter how slim, that playing the song would set them free? "We don't have another choice," she said, her voice trembling. "No," Tom said firmly, grabbing her arm. "We don't even know what this thing is. We'll figure something else out." But as he spoke, the room began to close in around them. The walls seemed to groan, the air thickening with every passing second. The shadow on the stairs moved closer, and with it came an unbearable cold, sapping their strength. "We're out of time," Sarah whispered. She broke free of Tom's grip and sat at the dusty piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. "Sarah, don't..." But before Tom could stop her, she began to play. The first notes rang out, hollow and eerie, as if the piano itself were crying. Sarah's hands moved almost of their own accord, the melody unfamiliar yet strangely instinctive. The air around them shifted, and the shadow stopped its advance, swaying as though mesmerized by the music. The room grew brighter, bathed in an otherworldly light that emanated from the piano. The mirror on the far wall flickered to life again, revealing Elvis's sorrowful face. His lips moved, and this time Sarah could hear the words, "Keep going. Don't stop." As the song continued, the shadow began to shrink, its edges fraying like fabric unraveling. The whispers grew louder, desperate and pleading, "Don't let it end. Don't let it end." But Sarah didn't falter. She played the final chords, her heart pounding in her chest. The last note hung in the air, a single haunting vibration that seemed to echo forever. The shadow let out a guttural, inhuman scream and dissolved into nothingness, leaving only a faint, acrid smell behind. The mirror cracked once more, its surface shattering into countless pieces. In its place was a plain wall, as if the mirror had never existed. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the door at the top of the stairs creaked open, revealing the dimly lit hallway beyond. Tom grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her to her feet. "Let's get out of here." She nodded, her hands trembling, and they fled the basement, through the mansion, and out into the cool night air. As they reached their car, Sarah turned back for one last look at Graceland. The house stood silent and still, the upstairs windows dark once more. But faintly, just on the edge of hearing, she thought she could still make out the sound of a piano playing. And from somewhere deep within the house, a voice, rich and familiar, sang softly. "Wise men say only fools rush in." Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.